I'm like, okay, so how do I help these introverts on the internet become charismatic? And I read all this literature and I was like, okay, like all these theories on political science, like I can't teach that on the internet. And then all these things about like, yeah, charisma involves being a messenger from God. And it's like, that's kind of hard to do, right? Maybe we can talk about mania and how to induce psychosis and psychedelics, and maybe that'll make you charismatic. Who the hell knows? But there are particular qualities that you can develop. So someone asked me this question recently, Dr. K, how do you develop charisma if you're an introvert? And it really got me thinking about, okay, what exactly is charisma? And the real problem with charisma being that a lot of people who are charismatic are extroverts. So if we sort of think about people who are charismatic versus not charismatic, people who are charismatic usually enjoy the spotlight, right? So they're extroverts. They have no problem being the center of attention. We think about charismatic people as leaders. There's a ton of research on that. We think about charismatic people as people who give speeches. And then there's this other group of people, the introverts. These are the people that enjoy one-on-one conversations. They have difficulty with things like public speaking, and they oftentimes try to make themselves invisible in situations that demand leadership or charisma. So how do I go about helping someone who's an introvert, who's fundamentally doesn't like being in the spotlight, develop charisma? I feel really confident in what we're going to teach today. We're going to share a lot about the fundamentals of what inspires humans, how you create inspiration in someone else from like a neuroscience and even psychological perspective. But what I'd love to do today is a little bit different. It's going to be kind of a longer video, is walk y'all through my journey of trying to answer this question. So we're going to start with a lot of where people get advice on charisma, which is like their personal experience. And I kind of fall into this category. So I'm an introvert by nature. I'm still an introvert. And yet I've given keynote speeches. Yesterday I was at a bar and there were like 65 people there, and they actually asked me spontaneously to give a speech. So I climbed up on a table, I said a couple of words, and this is the kind of thing that an introvert normally is not able to do. The challenge though is that like if we look at people who have charisma and they tell other people, this is how you develop charisma, right? We have a lot of these people who will offer advice based on their personal experience. This is how you become charismatic. But there's a fundamental problem that I see with this methodology as a psychiatrist, as someone who's done research, which is that what works for one human being may not translate over to a population, right? So that human being has their unique set of genetics, they have their unique set of circumstances, they have their unique experiences, they have their unique temperaments. And so based on all of these individual factors, they will give advice. Oh, in order to be charismatic, you should just do this. The other problem with people who oftentimes give advice on charisma is that they are extroverts. So they're sort of fundamentally different, right? These are people who don't shy away from the spotlight. And so any advice that they give is difficult to translate over to introverts. So the first thing that I kind of thought about in terms of answering this question is I can share some personal experience, but the personal experience is personal and subjective. So then I decided to move into the research, and this is where things got actually really complicated. If you look at the research on charisma, it's an absolute mess, right? So this is a paper about charisma research, knowledge growth, and disciplinary shifts. Let's take a look at what the science says. If we look at charisma research, what we see is that charisma research is all over the place. So there are papers from sociology, papers from religion. These are the categories of publications about charisma. So people will do things like they'll look at like famous leaders like Mahatma Gandhi or even people like Hitler, and they'll sort of say like, okay, how was this person able to be charismatic? There are a lot of studies on religion, right? So we can look at religious figures like Jesus Christ or the Prophet Muhammad, Krishna, whoever, and we can sort of say, okay, this is what charisma is. And then there's a bunch of research from like management and business literature about like, okay, like, you know, if you're a leader in an organization, you know, what does leadership in an organization actually look like? What makes someone a corporate leader? Who should you promote? There are all these kind of LinkedIn circle jerk sort of perspectives on charisma and leadership. And then, of course, there's papers on applied psychology. Like, so this is kind of closer to my area of expertise as a psychiatrist. You know, how does charisma work from a psychological perspective? But as I looked at a bunch of these papers, and I probably looked at 40 or 50 papers on charisma at this point from all of these disciplines, what I was really troubled by is like how not applicable they are to you or a person who's trying to develop a skill set, right? So if I look at political science papers, for example, they're going to talk about like, okay, so Richard Nixon or, you know, Chairman Mao. Like, we'll look at all these like political science papers and like, these people are charismatic. But if you're an introvert who's like sitting at home alone watching a YouTube video, how can you benefit from like a political analysis of how Chairman Mao became a great leader? So this is the problem with the research on charisma, is that it is so hard to apply to an individual. So a lot of the research was all over the place, but there was some really good stuff. So there are some papers that we'll get into in a second that sort of break down the qualities of charisma. Now, they still don't really show us how to develop those qualities, but at least we can sort of get very detailed in terms of a definition of it. But before I found those papers, I actually found some really interesting research that was incredibly devastating to find. This is a paper about the development of a 5-factor model charisma compound and its relation to career outcomes. So this is looking at personality, including extroversion, and its relationship to charisma. And here's the really scary thing. Using the FFM 5-factor model as a guiding framework, only extroversion and low neuroticism were found to be significantly and consistently related to the ratings of charisma, indicating that highly charismatic leaders tend to be extroverted and less neurotic. So this is a paper that is basically saying charisma is a component of extroversion, or that these two things are intrinsically tied. Now, I didn't give up, and we're not going to, and we ended up finding a way to thread this needle, but this explains why it's so hard for introverts to develop charisma, because charisma seems to be intrinsically connected to being an extrovert. And at the same time, if we tunnel down a little bit further, which we're about to do, we will see what are the components of charisma, and are there certain adaptations that we can make as extroverts so that the things that are natural for introverts are things that we can actually develop. So this is a great paper that looks at how do we measure charisma. So it's fine. You can say, oh, like Chairman Mao was charismatic, or like the president of the United States is charismatic, whatever. But can we actually like tunnel down and measure the components of charisma? So this is a paper that looks at something called factor analysis. So, and basically looks at like the components of charisma. So someone who's charismatic is communicative, attracts admiration and inspires, is honest and reliable, is attractive, is a calm and visionary, is powerful and dominant. But this creates another problem if we sort of look at like these kind of qualities, right? And this is the problem with the research, is that we can say, okay, a charismatic person is powerful, dominant, and attractive. That doesn't help you become powerful, dominant, and attractive, right? There's another very important step, and this is a big problem with the charisma research, is that they don't tell you how to become those things. They just kind of tell you this is what it is. So I'll give you all kind of a simple analogy. So if we can, I see this all the time in like business, right? Where someone will look at like some successful entrepreneur and they'll say, entrepreneurs are intrinsically motivated. Entrepreneurs are willing to work hard. And it's like, fine that you can say that, or successful entrepreneurs, but it doesn't teach you how to develop those qualities that then lead to success in entrepreneurship. And that is the resolution that we're going to get to today, because I think I've honestly sort of figured it out. So we don't have to go into too much detail, but these are the components of charisma, right? So they're an eloquent person, a person rich in expression, excellent communication skills, exceptional oratorical skills, attracts admiration, attracts attention. We don't like this as introverts, has significant influence, inspires people. So then the question is like, how do you become those things? Okay. Positive energy, calm, sexually attractive, right? So for those of us that are sexually unattractive, or this is my favorite, magnetically attractive person. The research says, okay, if you want to be charismatic, you need to be magnetically attractive. And it's like, as a clinician, right? So I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a clinician. I work with human beings to try to help them change, but I have no idea how to make someone magnetically attractive, or I didn't when we started this journey, and we'll get to how we sort of get there. So this is the challenge, and this is what a lot of y'all who are introverts probably face, is that people will give you these things like, oh yeah, like if you want to be charismatic, you just need to inspire people. You just need to have this magnetic sexual attraction, and then you'll be charismatic. And it's like, how the F do I do that? So we're going to look at charisma, an ill-defined measure, an ill-defined gift. If we look at the definitions of charisma, this is what's really interesting. A lot of these like charismatic definitions, because remember, a lot of these papers are religious, right? So there is an aspect of charisma that has been defined as like related to the divine. So if we look at historically like human beings who are really charismatic, part of their charisma is like, hey, normal people, I come from God. And when they say, I come from God, other human beings are like, oh, you are from the divine. And that gives you a sense of charisma. But if you're like an introvert watching a YouTube video at home, you can't like show up places and be like, oh, I am from the divine, right? So what's really cool about this paper is it looked at all of these factors and then tried to figure out, okay, is this useful for a definition? And they're like, no, this is, even if we can observe this, it's not very useful for a definition of charisma, okay? So this is where we are. This is sort of like my journey. And I'm like, okay, so how do I help these introverts on the internet become charismatic? And I read all this literature and I was like, okay, like all these theories on political science, like I can't teach that on the internet. And then all these things about like, yeah, charisma involves being a messenger from God. And it's like, that's kind of hard to do, right? Maybe we can talk about mania and how to induce psychosis and psychedelics, and maybe that'll make you charismatic. Who the hell knows? But it turns out that as I tunnel down into all this stuff, I did find particular things. So this is kind of the summary, okay? There are particular qualities that you can develop. There are some qualities of charisma that once we understand what the nature of inspiration is, right? So the people, we say that charismatic people inspire others, are good communicators. It turns out that this is where I sort of tried to bridge the gap between, now we're going to talk about neuroscience, what I've learned as a psychiatrist, right? Because I'll have people who come into my office who are directors at investment banks, and they're on the deck for promotion to being manager of North American business in software acquisitions. And they're like, they come into my office and they're like, I'm an introvert. Can you help me like give a great presentation? I'll be like, sure. Let us teach you these skills. When people hear about our coaching program, their first response is usually, why would I work with another human being when I can watch YouTube videos all on my own? Working with a coach is about amplifying your time and effort. We're great at wanting things and even making some progress, but we usually struggle with follow through or have some kind of setback. And that's exactly where working with a coach can help. Coaches provide personalized support to help you set appropriate goals, make progress, and even work through setbacks. Just let us know what your goals are, what kind of support you're looking for, and we'll match you with the best coach for your unique needs. Check out the link in the description below to see if coaching is right for you. So I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but if we think about inspiration, okay? Inspiration is something that can be scientifically evoked. So if we think about inspiration, a human being gets inspired by another human being. That means that we can actually tunnel down into that person's brain and understand this is what happens in someone in the audience when they feel inspired, right? You can actually figure out, like, inspiration is something that can be defined in a human being. So if you say, okay, Dr. K, I'm inspired, we can like literally understand what's going on in your brain, what's going on in your psychology. And once we understand what's going on in your brain and what's going on in your psychology, then we can also look at what did someone do to evoke that empathetic or emotional response in your brain. Then once we look at that thing, okay, what did this person do? Then we can teach you how to do this thing over here that will inspire other people. And this is where I had to really bridge the gap between, basic neuroscience research, which we'll get into in a second. And this is also where like I think that my training as a psychiatrist really comes in, because what is my day job technically? My day job technically is to alter the emotional state of the people who come into my office, right? So it's like we are trained in taking someone who is depressed and altering their emotional state. And sometimes we're also trained to have someone come into my office who's not motivated, and then they leave the office inspired to do more in their life. So this is where I kind of put together clinical work with some basic awesome neuroscience, and then certain like skills building things and some of this leadership stuff to sort of synthesize what charisma is and how to develop those skills. So let's take a look at the things that we're going to be focusing on. We're going to look at like the components of charisma, and then we're going to teach y'all how to train these things, okay? And the way that we're going to train these is in two ways. We're going to train something called macro skills. So these are like large scale kind of things to work on that are like more general. And then there are also going to be micro skills. So micro skills are very, very discrete, small things that you can do, like minor things like eye contact, facial expression, emotion of your facial expression, affective expression, all these tiny little things that will actually build us up towards charisma, and they're large-scale things that we can kind of work on, okay? So the three main things that we need to be able to look at are vision, ideology, values, morals, beliefs, mission, symbols of a leader, that they're emotion-based, and that they're expressive communicators. So these are the three things that are like useful for a definition. What you'll notice in here is that physical attractiveness is not actually a part of this, right? So you don't need to be good looking to be charismatic. And what we actually see is that if we look at the top three factors, right, attractive is number 4. So attractive explains only 9% or 8.96% of the variance in charisma. So attractiveness accounts for 9% of what charisma is. Whereas the majority of the factors, right? So if we look at communicative is 14%, attracts admiration, inspires 13%, honest and reliable, calm and visionary, like those are things that we can actually train. So the majority of charisma can absolutely be trained. That's what I sort of ended up doing with myself, and we'll walk y'all through how to do that. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is communicative. I want y'all to think about the difference between someone who, when we think about someone who's charismatic, right? These are people who give speeches. They're oratorical. And I want you to think about the way that you communicate. What's the big difference between someone who gives a speech and when you just open your mouth and talk? So the big difference is actually preparation. This is what a lot of people don't realize. They think, oh, this person is a gifted speaker. They're not a gifted speaker. So when someone gives a speech, right? So I'm going to be giving a keynote later this year. I've given keynote speeches before. You know, I'll walk into a room where there's like hundreds of people. Like a big part of me being able to give a good speech is to prepare what I say. So if you want to be good at communicating, this is a big mistake that a lot of people make. You need to have a clean thought process. Think through what you are going to say. Play with what you are going to say. Actually, so before I even started streaming, a lot of people think, oh, like I'm live streaming and I'm like really eloquent, right? What people don't realize is that I literally wrote a book about neuroscience and addiction. Never going to see the light of day. It's an absolute trash book. I wrote a whole manuscript about neuroscience and addiction, focusing on technology. And in the process of writing that book, which was like hundreds of pages, I clarified my thought process. And then when I open my mouth, what comes out feels well-formed, right? So then when people listen to me, they're like, wow, this guy like really understands what they're saying. And the reason is because I literally practiced my communication through writing. So I don't know if y'all can kind of tell, but like take a look at this video, right? So does this video, maybe it's terrible, who knows? Okay, you see that authenticity? Right? See that emotional expression? So we'll get to those in a second. But even this video, like I thought through this so that when I open my mouth and I speak, it turns out that like I've had a lot of mental practice. And when I've had mental practice, the parts of my brain that formulate words have like already done it a couple of times, right? So then when I open my mouth and I speak, it seems clear, it seems concise, it seems like I'm making a lot of sense. So this is where if you're someone who struggles with charisma, this is the first macro skill. The major things that you're going to talk about, like the things that you frequently get asked questions to, you should sort of map out what your answers are. So if someone asks you, oh, like, you know, tell me about yourself, you should think through that answer. What do I want to say about myself? I'm someone who's on a journey. This is my profession. This is what I'm interested in. And what I really am looking forward to in life is this, this, and this. So when you have a crafted answer, and it's not that you have to prep for all the answers, right? Think about like all of the most common questions that you get asked. There's a really easy way to think about which are the common questions you get asked. Think about the questions that you hate answering the most. You should spend some time journaling, writing out some answers. They don't have to be right answers or wrong answers. This is the other thing that people sort of get really misunderstand. You don't need to come up with a good answer. You just need to have your brain practice thinking about that answer. And the more that you practice it, the better the answer will come out. Even if you say, hey, I'm someone who's trying to figure out what to do with my life, right? I had these challenges. You can actually embrace imperfections. That's actually a part of charisma as well. That's part of the authenticity, which we'll get to in a second. But basically, think about how you're going to answer these common questions, the questions that you hate the most. And as you think about those questions, it will naturally change the fluency of your response. As the fluency of your response changes, you will appear more confident, more inspiring. Like people will be like, wow, this person really like has an idea of what they're doing with their life, which gets us to a couple of other things. So calm and visionary. So if you look at research on, I know we're jumping around a little bit. So if you look at research on leadership, what we basically know is that like corporate leaders are people who have a vision for where the company is going. It's not that they need to know the details. They just have to have like a vision and a direction in life. So if you think about who is inspiring in, in the life when you encounter people who have like a direction, have a clear vision of where they're going. And when you have a vision of where you are going in life, then that will create calmness. So if we sort of think about everyone's like, there's so much existential depression right now. And why is that? It's because there's so much uncertainty about the future. No one knows what's happening in the world. No one knows if there's there's a climate crisis or is there inflation, what's happening to the economy, what's happening to elections. And there's a lot of uncertainty. When there is a lot of uncertainty, it disturbs our calm, and it's hard to have a vision. We don't know if the world is going to exist 100 years from now. We don't know if what dating is going to be like. So there's so much uncertainty that it makes it very hard to have a vision. When you don't have a vision about your future, then it's going to be very hard to inspire other people. So human beings latch onto other human beings who appear to have shit figured out, right? Like that's who we latch onto. We don't latch onto people who are like, I have no idea what I'm doing in life. We latch onto people who are like, this is how to live life, right? These are our internet gurus like myself, like these people who show up on the internet and they're like, this is how you live life, right? And why do people get attracted to me? It's because I have this idea of, I have a vision, right? And that's what people sort of resonate with. Vision is sort of really important to develop. It's important to really think about yourself in terms of developing a narrative. We have a whole section of Dr. K's Guide to Trauma where we sort of teach y'all how to do that. We have videos on post-traumatic growth. So we have a lot of resources here at Healthy Gamer where we sort of help people develop a vision of their life. So you have to have like a vision, and you have to have good communication, and good communication involves practice, okay? So there's a couple of other things that we're going to talk about. So attracts admiration and inspires. We'll get to that in a second. And then honest and reliable. So this is where I would say that a big part of charisma is being authentic. So there are some studies that show that embracing your vulnerabilities leads to other people perceiving you as charismatic. Now, here's the big problem with introverts, is that generally speaking, extroverts are okay showing themselves, right? That's what makes them extroverts. I'm okay being on display. But the basic problem with introverts is that we don't like putting ourselves on display. We don't like showing ourselves. This makes us deeply uncomfortable. So then what happens is introverts will try to hide, right? We're really good at becoming invisible. We're really good at standing at the edge of the party and sort of quietly sipping our drink and scrolling on our phone or whatever so that people do not see us. When we become invisible, it is impossible for us to appear authentic because they don't see us at all. You must be seen in order to be charismatic. Kind of makes sense, right? The charismatic person is in the center. This is where we get to a huge problem and sort of, I guess, the crux. I'm going to jump to this. So this is where I really had to bridge the gap, because now the question is, okay, so if it's hard for you to be seen, how do we overcome that? How do we appear as authentic? And this is where we really go kind of off the rails, okay? So I want y'all to think about this. So in order to be seen, now we're getting to really the clinical psychiatry neuroscience level. This is not leadership. This is not some emergent property. This is not abstract. This is really, really, really granular, okay? So as a human being, how do I attract admiration, inspire, and feel honest and reliable to other people? How do I do this, okay? So this may sound like, okay, this seems really hard to do, but we're going to break it down for you. So these basically have to do with human-to-human interactions. So if you think about, if I inspire other people, there is something I am doing. Now we're going to get to the micro skills and stuff. There is something that I am doing as a human. There's some combination of facial expressions, words, the way that I look at people. Eye contact is huge. These kinds of things become really, really important for evoking inspiration in other people, for appearing honest and reliable in other people. Because I don't know if this kind of makes sense to y'all, but those are empathic changes in someone else's brain. In the audience of the people that you're talking to, there are particular things that you can do that will evoke a sense of authenticity, evoke a sense of reliability, evoke a sense of vulnerability. So we can evoke all these things. And this is where we also know actually that like sociopaths are good at this, right? Sociopaths and psychopaths will use these techniques. So love, eye contact, and the developmental origins of empathy versus psychopathy. So like there are certain techniques that we can actually dig into, and the biggest one is eye contact. So now we're actually going to get to the meat of the problem that introverts have, and this is what keeps y'all from being charismatic, okay? So we're going to scroll down, right? So this is now we're like neuroscience, baby. Like, look at this. This is great. Asymmetrical frontal cortical activity. Startle reflex modulation. We're leaving Jesus and his religious inspiration behind now. Facial electromyography. Like, this is great. The affective eye contact effect. Possible mechanisms. What does this mean? Eye contact is what evokes emotions. So here's the key thing. This is where introverts and extroverts are fundamentally different. Perception of another's attention, self-referential processing, reciprocal attention or interaction, affective systems, affective arousal, motivational tendency, affective valence, bodily responses, cognitive processing. This is the answer. Now, I know y'all are saying, okay, but Dr. K, what does this mean? Okay, so we're gonna like tell a story, okay? It's all about the eyes. And there's a story that I have to tell y'all. So when I was in med school, one of my best friends was gay. And so one day I asked him, I was like, and this was like, I was in med school back in like 2010. Okay. So like homosexuality wasn't quite as accepted as it is now. Arguably, it's still not accepted. So I was asking him, I was like, bro, how do you know if someone, like if another dude is gay? Like, how can you tell? And so, I was worried. I was like thinking about like stereotypes around fashion and things like that. But he was like, it's all in the eye contact. And he explained to me this thing that he would call gay eyes. And so like, like gay dudes, apparently, according to him, I don't know if this is true or not, whatever, one person's experience, like they will make eye contact with each other. And there is a certain like kind of like eye contact thing. And it sort of makes sense, right? So we know that the way that someone looks at you, profound. So someone can look at you and make you feel creeped out. Someone can look at you and make you like, they can give you like the let's fuck eyes. Like someone can look at you and looks are like, eyes are the window to the soul. This is what like poets have been saying for hundreds or thousands of years. So eye contact is huge. So I don't know if you know this, but this even transcends human beings. So fixed gaze, if a human being gazes at a gorilla, the gorilla will attack you. Like this is insane, right? So this is how deep this stuff goes. So eye contact is crucial because eye contact indicates attention. Eye contact indicates threat. Eye contact indicates love. So eye contact is huge. And we also know that there are a couple of really fascinating things. So people who struggle with social connection also struggle with eye contact. If we look at people on the autism spectrum, they struggle with eye contact and they struggle with socialization. They struggle with empathy. If we look at people who are psychopaths, their eye contact is very different from like normal people. So eye contact is the big thing. Now let's understand a couple of other things, right? So what is this self-referential processing thing? So this is going to make so much sense. Hopefully it'll be, blew my mind once I connected these dots, okay? So, like when you're out somewhere and someone's like looking at you, and then you look at them, like you notice like someone's looking at me, right? So some part of your brain is processing that you look at them and then they look away. Like y'all have done this, right? And sometimes you're looking at someone, you don't realize you're looking at someone, and then they notice you're looking at them, and they look at you and you're like, oh shit, this person realizes that that I'm looking at them, and then you look away. So there's so much that is conveyed through eye contact. And the key thing that separates introverts and extroverts is this thing called self-referential processing. So let's take a look at this, okay? So the perception of another's attention. And then what this triggers is something called self-referential processing. And what does this mean? When someone looks at you, it triggers thoughts about how you see yourself. So when someone looks at you, so like let's say you're at home right now, okay? And you're dressed like a slob. And that's like not a problem, right? Like you're dressed like a slob. Maybe you haven't brushed your teeth. Maybe you haven't fixed your hair. Maybe you're in your pajamas. Who knows? Maybe like, who knows, right? I have no idea. And we're okay with this. But if someone suddenly walks into the door, like, walks in the room and then they see us in this state, it triggers all kinds of responses. Oh crap, I didn't realize this person was coming over. Oh crap, I didn't realize I wasn't ready to be seen this way. So when someone looks at you, it triggers this self-referential processing. So you see yourself through their eyes. And this is the key thing. If you are an introvert, this will evoke usually, and for those of us who are neurotic and things like that, will evoke negative things. So we start to think about ourselves when someone looks at us. And if we have low self-esteem, if we have a lack of confidence, this self-referential processing will bring all of that to the surface. So we don't like to be seen because anytime we get looked at, I don't know if this kind of makes sense. I mean, hopefully this resonates with y'all's experience. Anytime someone looks at you, the worst thoughts about yourself, for some fucking reason, get floated to the surface of your mind, and that's what you start thinking about. And that's what makes it so hard to be charismatic, because human beings are empathic, which means when you start thinking negative thoughts about yourself, you feel uncomfortable. Your face kind of goes a little bit like this. This is extreme, right? It's not really how I feel. Y'all can tell that I don't really feel embarrassed. You can empathically tell. I can try to fake this expression, but you're getting my empathic energy, which is I'm having a great time, right? It's like, I can't hide that I'm having a great time. And in the same vein, when you are embarrassed, when other people look at you and all of that embarrassment comes up, you can try your best to hide it, but it does not get hidden. So then what happens is, what do you convey? You convey a lack of authenticity because you're not hiding your embarrassment. There's no clarity of vision. There's no, vision of the future. There's no calmness. And there certainly isn't like any kind of clear communication, right? I'm going to stumble over my words. I'm not going to look at I'm not going to meet your gaze. I'm going to look away from you. And when I look away from you, I'm going to become a little bit more invisible. And then charisma goes out the window. When people look at you, it triggers all of these negative thoughts about yourself. The other person empathically connects to that because they see, oh, crap. And this is what happens when you notice that I'm looking at you and you look at me and I look away, right? Like that whole dance that we do is because I'm not comfortable. I didn't realize, I know, oh, you didn't want to be looked at. I was looking at you without your permission. There's a lot of discomfort, and so we're not going to look at each other anymore. We're going to break this empathic connection. We are going to avoid each other. And I don't know if this makes sense. It's so stupid to say. But anytime you're making that eye contact dance, no one is getting charisma points. Like, not a single person, right? Like, no one's like, yeah, like, I'm so charismatic. No one's walking away from that interaction thinking like, oh, wow, this person is so charismatic. We are all avoiding each other. On the flip side, what they tell you when you give a speech, if you want to give a good speech, what you need to do is don't look at the audience. You need to make eye contact, rotating eye contact with people in the audience. So I'm going to meet your eyes, and then I'm going to meet someone else's eyes, and then I'm going to meet someone else's eyes. And something about that, when we lock gazes, that triggers something empathically in me, and then everyone else in the audience will look at me and feel that empathic energy. So that's why even if we look at the camera angle, right, I'm not like looking over here, I'm looking over here because that creates, even across time and space in the internet, this evokes some kind of weird emotional crap. And this is the stuff that introverts stumble in the most. Okay? Because we don't do this. We don't make eye contact. We look away. And then if we're looking away and we're trying to disappear, how can we ever be charismatic? So now the question becomes, okay, Dr. K, fine. Even if eye contact is the big part, what do I do about it? So this is where there are a couple of things. The first is that when you make eye contact with someone, this triggers self-referential processing, right? So all of these thoughts about yourself come up. So these are the macroscopic things that we need to work on. So if when you make eye contact with someone, you feel embarrassed about your hair, you feel embarrassed about your appearance, you feel embarrassed about your weight, you feel embarrassed about you're a loser, right? These are the things that you need to tackle. Now, tackling them involves a lot of different steps. So if it's something that's appearance related, like by all means, looks max, right? Spend some time focusing on your hair, spend some time on your style or whatever. So what we're trying to do is unburden our self-referential processing. We don't want to stop it. We want to recognize that as introverts who are highly neurotic, these are the warning signals that my brain offers. So those are all the things that we need to fix. So I want y'all to think about this, right? So when someone makes eye contact with you, all of your negativity comes up. The way to develop confidence and charisma is to actually fix all those issues. And I know it sounds kind of crazy. It's not actually nearly as hard as it seems. So work on your appearance some, but let's talk about, okay, this person sees a loser. So how do we fix that? That's where we need to do some introspection. What do they see that makes them see a loser? Why do I feel like a loser? How can you see a loser? They don't actually technically, and this is the crux of it, the majority of introverts that I've worked with, not the majority, I want to say every single one, I cannot think of a single one who does not fit this pattern, who develops charisma. What we work on is this idea that someone can see the loserness in them. It's not something that you can see. It is something that you carry around and you project empathically. When someone looks at you and you make yourself small and you go like this, that's what makes you a loser. It's not that you are a loser. It's that you evoke a loser.exe kind of empathic response, invisible.exe empathic response, which then removes the charisma. So practically what y'all should do, this is kind of what I do with my patients, is, when someone looks at you, what are the thoughts? Write down all the thoughts that you have about yourself and then work on those thoughts. Okay, why do I think I'm a loser? Do they actually see this? Do they not see this? I think cognitive behavioral therapy is really helpful for these kinds of things where you challenge some of these thoughts and work on some of these things. You don't have to fix everything 100%. This is just a great way to start, right? So the key thing is that when that eye contact happens, the less burdened your self-referential processing is, the more charisma will naturally emerge. And then you'll be able to be authentic. You'll be able to open your mouth and share the communication that you've practiced. And then all of these things will start clicking together and you will be more charismatic. So now what we're going to talk about is the micro skills. So this is sort of like big picture stuff. Rehearse your answers, think through some of your answers, develop some sort of vision or direction in life, do some good old self-acceptance, whatever the F, and then you'll be able to project that authentic energy. That's worth 40% of charisma right there. Then you work on this eye contact stuff, this self-referential processing. That's worth about 20% ballpark. And then the last things that we're going to talk about, the last 40% are going to be these microscopic skills. So first skill, no surprise, is learn to make eye contact. So this is where I would say, when you're walking down the street, make eye contact with people, right? So you can and this is where it's going to feel really awkward. So here's another thing that we got to show, okay? So all this crap that I'm telling y'all to do, y'all are not going to want to do. So the more you do it, the easier it gets. Exposure and response prevention for OCD. So this is where basically what we want to do, all the stuff that I'm telling y'all to do, we want to just do it. We don't have to do it right. What we're doing is exposure. And then the more that we do it, the more that our subjective experience of distress will change, okay? So here's an example of something called the subjective units of distress scale. So the first time that you make eye contact, you will feel completely overwhelmed, right? So this is extreme distress. The next time you make eye contact, you can't think clearly, at risk to make very bad choices. The next time you make eye contact, high levels of fear, anxiety, sadness, agitation, bodily tension. These feelings cannot be tolerated for long. The next time you make eye contact, you feel agitated and tense, starting to feel overwhelmed. It's hard to focus. The next time you make eye contact, most people would describe as a bad day, but still able to do what you need to do. So even though you're making the eye contact, you can handle it, but it's really unpleasant. Then the more that you make eye contact, it becomes unpleasant. It becomes a nagging negative mood state, but is not enough to produce many bodily symptoms. Then the feelings become mild tension, mild worry, mild sadness. Then eventually something beautiful will happen. You will feel alert, but not distressed. You notice that they are looking at you. The amount of tension and stress needed to keep your attention from wandering, right? Now you're not distracted by someone else's gaze. And then eventually you'll get into this warm, mellow, contented feeling. When people are looking at you, it'll feel like relaxing on the beach. You'll feel safe in your introvert blanket, even though you're in an extroverted environment. And when you get to these states, okay, then we go back to here, and then you're going to attract admiration and inspire. You're going to be calm and visionary. You're going to be honest and reliable, right? You're going to be chill. You're going to be in control. You're going to be tranquil. in the face of whatever the hell is going on in the world. And how do we know that this works? This is where we look at, this is what exposure and response prevention is. This is when we expose ourselves to stimuli that make us distressed. The more we expose ourselves to those stimuli, the more we will be able to tolerate it. And the more that our internal reaction will change. Once our internal reaction of distress starts to change, then we'll be calm, then we'll be tranquil, then we'll be able to speak, then we'll send the right empathic energy, and then suddenly we will be charismatic. So practically, how do you practice this? You just practice it. You just need to do it more and more and more, right? So make eye contact. So here's really concrete things that I would tell y'all. When y'all are out and about, at a grocery store or whatever, make eye contact. So at the very beginning, what I would do is make eye contact with someone who is not a potential mate. This is where things, because mating and romance make it hard. So, like if you're a dude and you're heterosexual, I suppose, make eye contact with like another dude and just like give him the bro nod, right? The bro nod, like whatever. Like, or if you make eye contact with someone across the street, you can just smile. You can just make eye contact and be like, hey, you don't have to do the eyebrows. Eyebrows can be weird. I mean, I like to do that kind of thing, but whatever. So there's another quick tip about embarrassment in social situations. It's something a lot of people don't realize. So the amount of embarrassment in a social situation is shared between the two people involved. So the more embarrassment you feel, the less embarrassment someone else feels. And at the same time, the more embarrassment that you can evoke in someone else, that will take the embarrassment off of your plate. So this is where, if I'm trying to make someone feel embarrassed, which I don't do usually, but, because it's creepy. This is not real. If y'all can't tell, this is more of a joke. Okay, don't actually do this. But this is where I love winking. Right? So if you look at somebody, you make eye contact, you wink at them, and suddenly they're like, I'm embarrassed. Can you imagine how mortifying it would be if you were walking down the street and a wild Dr. K appeared and winked at you? You'd be like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. And now you've transmitted the embarrassment to them, right? Okay, anyway, don't do that. Don't wink. Can creep people out. People think you're a sexual predator. Okay, but really, what we want to do is make eye contact with people. And then at the beginning, it'll be uncomfortable, but the more that you do it, the more it'll be actually start to be pleasant, right? So making eye contact, don't try to hit someone up, don't try to talk to someone. The more transient that this is, the better it will be. So you don't want to engage in conversation. It'll be comfortable for you, safe for them, and you'll get better at it. So you'll sort of tone down that subjective distress that you experience from eye contact. Now, this is the cool thing. Toning down the subjective distress from eye contact will, I don't know if this makes sense, you can solve the self-referential processing in two ways. One is you can deal with the roots of the self-referential processing. So when other people see me, all of my lack of confidence comes to the surface. The second thing that you can do is reduce the triggering of the self-referential processing mechanism. And the way that you reduce that even turning on, you don't have to heal everything on the inside. You can just shut off that trigger in your brain. And the way that you shut off that trigger is by making eye contact with a lot of people, right? So the more that you make eye contact with people, the less that part of your brain will activate. So that's the first micro skill, is just eye contact. Start with small amounts. Start with people that you're passing on the street, opposite side of the street. People as you're walking by in the grocery store, you can do a nod, you can do a smile. Just practice that. So there's another set of social skills, which I think is really important for introverts to learn. This isn't necessarily charisma related, but generally speaking, people who are charismatic are okay doing this. There's a host of things that y'all are going to hate. You ready? So be able to interrupt people, be able to bowl people over in conversation. This is what we hate. When we get trapped, when you're an introvert and you get trapped at a party by an extrovert who is completely oblivious to your signals of distress and is so self-absorbed, and they bowl you over in conversation, you can't get in a word edgewise. We need to accumulate. We need to draw on some of these Sith powers and learn some of the dark arts for ourselves. So oftentimes what you'll find is that you're in a conversation and you don't know when to jump in. So don't wait for the right time. Just open your mouth and start talking. Be a bull in a china shop. Just be like, hey, hold on a second. So there are a couple of concrete techniques that I would say. One is, I literally will use this phrase, can I jump in for a second? I just open my mouth and just bull it out. Can I jump in for a second? And then you'll interrupt and everyone will shut up. And this is fine. Then you start speaking, which may sound bad in that particular case. Over time, the key thing is developing a lack of distress from using these skills. Then what happens is you interrupt someone and you start speaking if you have a vision, if you are a good orator, if you have something to add to the conversation, then you'll check all those boxes and you will become charismatic. So this is another problem that introverts have, is that, so I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but one of the most common things with introverts is you have something useful to contribute to the conversation. You get excited about sharing something. You have a cool insight. You read a cool paper. Actually, it's like this. You have something really good to say, which if you can say it, will win you points. Everyone will be impressed by what you say. But we are so unable to interrupt that we never have those opportunities. Therefore, we never appear competent. We never appear charismatic. And then what happens is 6 minutes later, you get an opportunity to jump into the conversation, but now that good point that you have has been left in the past. You can't 8 minutes ago, we were talking about what happened in this political election, and here's my thoughts about it. So there's actually a good concrete technique there that I also use. You can do that. We can say, I actually want to go back to something that we were talking about earlier. Can we just jump back to politics for a second? I thought this was really interesting what you said. Here's what I think about it. So you can actually use that technique as well. You can say, can I jump in for a second? Or you can say, when you get a chance, can we go back to something that we talked about for a second? And then everyone else will be like, sure, why not? Conversation is malleable. It's flowing, right? You can direct the flow of the conversation. And by the way, when you direct the flow of the conversation, you are in control and you will become more charismatic. So those are two really concrete tips. The third thing that I'm going to share with y'all is that there's something that I do a lot, which is I will raise my hand a little bit and I will open my mouth. So this is way if you don't want to interrupt, right? So when you start to speak, people will notice. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll shut up. And I know this works, and you know this works because you do this all the time. You're about to speak, and then someone else opens their mouth, and what happens? You shut up. You let them speak. So even if you're uncomfortable directly interrupting people, the other thing you can do is just I know it feels awkward. That's where we go back to the subjective units of distress scale. So you got to do this 100 times, and then you will feel more comfortable with it. So these are kind of the micro skills that we want to work on. And this is what we're kind of sort of synthesizing everything now. So it's really hard to develop charisma as an introvert because, according to some studies, charisma is a feature of extroversion. But I don't think it's a feature of extroversion. I think that extroverts are more naturally suited to become charismatic. And if you're an introvert, you need to make a couple of modifications with your default programming to develop that charisma. We know what those factors are. We know that you need to be calm. We know you need to be visionary, right? And you can't be calm while the subjective units of distress scale is through the roof. Calm, visionary, articulate. You need to think through what you need to say. This is what communicative means. It means that you have a well-formed thought in your head before you open your mouth. So all of those things you can actually work on. And then there's the set of micro skills of being able to interrupt people, sharing your thoughts, a couple of these techniques. And then the last and most important thing for social skills in general, socialization with human beings happens with the eyes more than any other part of the body. So work on your eye contact. Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.